There was a time, not during a war of tanks or trenches, but of rockets and flags, when the United States seriously considered nuking the moon. Yes, the moon. Not metaphorically, not in science fiction, but with a real thermonuclear bomb. 250,000 miles from Earth, floating in the cold vacuum of space, our celestial companion was nearly reduced to a stage for geopolitical theater. And the audience? The world. It was 1958. The Cold War was burning quietly but fiercely. Just a year earlier, the Soviet Union had stunned the world by launching Sputnik, the first man-made satellite. The beeping metal sphere didn't do much, but it did everything. It shattered the illusion of American technological superiority and hurled the US into a panic known as the Sputnik crisis. The space race had begun, and it was deadly serious. And when the stakes are that high, when national pride, scientific prestige, and global influence are on the line, governments think in extremes. That's when a classified project emerged from the shadows. A top-secret plan known cryptically as Project A119. Behind the coded name lay a breathtakingly bizarre objective: to detonate a nuclear bomb on the surface of the moon. It wasn't to destroy it, though, make no mistake, the scientists did run the math on whether the explosion would alter the moon's orbit. The idea wasn't annihilation. It was visibility. Spectacle. They wanted the explosion to be seen from Earth. A glowing mushroom cloud against the black sky. A message, writ large in fire and radiation. The United States is here, and it's winning. But here's the twist. This was not the work of madmen in lab coats or Hollywood screenwriters. This plan came from within the inner circle of American military intelligence, backed by serious institutions. Among them, the Illinois Institute of Technology and none other than the U.S. Air Force. And one of the brilliant young minds quietly tapped to work on the project? A 24-year-old physicist named Carl Sagan. Yes, that Carl Sagan. The future host of Cosmos, the voice of poetic reason and peaceful space exploration, once helped calculate how dust and radioactive fallout would disperse from a nuclear blast on the moon. It sounds like science fiction. But it's all true. The rationale behind the plan was almost cinematic in its simplicity. The Soviets were ahead. The Americans needed to catch up, and then leap ahead. They needed to show they could do something the USSR hadn't even dreamed of. A nuclear flash on the moon, visible from Earth with the naked eye, was as much a psychological weapon as it was a technological demonstration. But how do you nuke the moon? The logistics were nightmarish. The warhead would have to be light enough to be carried by a rocket with the lift capacity of the era, most likely an early ICBM. It would have to survive the journey through space, impact precisely on the moon's surface, and detonate at just the right altitude to create a dramatic, observable explosion without burying the fireball in lunar dust. Everything had to be perfect. There were no do-overs on the moon. And then came the moral question. What would humanity gain from detonating a weapon of mass destruction on a celestial body that had only ever been a source of wonder, myth, and scientific curiosity? Within the military, some officials voiced concern. What if the explosion backfired? What if it created global panic instead of national pride? What if the Soviets responded not with fear, but with a bigger, bolder spectacle of their own? And of course, there were the scientists. Quietly, nervously, some of them began to raise red flags. The moon has no atmosphere, so the mushroom cloud, the iconic signal of nuclear detonation, wouldn't rise the same way it does on Earth. The lack of air meant there'd be no booming sound. And while the blast might be visible, it wouldn't be nearly as dramatic as hoped. Plus, there was the risk, however small, that radioactive material could settle into lunar dust, potentially compromising future missions, or even scientific studies of the moon. Back then, no one knew how stable the moon's surface really was. It was a gamble based more on politics than science. Still, the plan progressed. It was developed under the Air Force's Special Studies Group at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Dozens of memos, technical reports, and internal evaluations were prepared. Sagan, years later, hinted at his involvement in scholarship applications, unwittingly revealing classified information, though it would take decades for the full story to surface. So what stopped the madness? Ironically, it was the same force that had fueled the idea in the first place: public perception. Behind closed doors, officials realized that an act meant to inspire awe might instead inspire horror. Nuclear fear was already gripping the globe. The moon, in all its quiet dignity, was a shared symbol, across nations, across cultures. To desecrate it with an explosion could be seen as an act of cosmic vandalism. And so, just as quietly as it had begun, Project A119 was shelved. Buried in classified archives. Forgotten for decades. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that the project came to light, when Leonard Reifel, the physicist who led the study, revealed the existence of the plan in interviews. Declassified documents followed. The story stunned the world. Carl Sagan's name emerged again, not as a culprit, but as a reminder of how even the most peaceful minds can be pulled into the orbit of military agendas. The question remains: what would the world look like if the US had followed through? Would the space race have accelerated further, becoming even more dangerous? Would public fascination with the moon have turned to fear or revulsion? Would future lunar missions have been greeted with protests instead of celebration? Or would it have all faded into history, a footnote in the endless parade of Cold War absurdities? We'll never know. But the truth is, for a moment in time, humanity stood on the edge of madness, willing to turn one of the most sacred objects in our sky into a stage for nuclear bravado. And what does that say about us? Maybe that in our pursuit of dominance, we sometimes lose sight of the very things that make us human: wonder, restraint, and reverence for the unknown. Because the moon, unscarred, untouched, is still up there. Silent, constant, watching. And maybe that's for the best.